Welcome, everybody, to the 9th broadcast of State of the Arts. And we are so happy to be broadcasting once again from Memorial Center of Innovation in Teaching and Learning. Thank you to Mark Shallow and Donna Downey and to all of the crew who are here, because we're blocked to the gills with crew. And a special thank you to Janet Herron and Benjamin Dugdale. This is a Facebook Live event about exploring the humanities and social sciences here at Memorial University. In this monthly program, that we talk with a variety of faculty members about their work and how their issues address teaching and research and critical understanding of the way our world is changing and turning and twisting beneath our very feet. My name is Lisa Moore, and I'm a writer and visual artist and associate professor in the Department of English at Memorial. And I am very pleased to introduce our guest, Dr. Jennifer Dyer, who is currently the head of Memorial's Gender Studies Department. And Jennifer received her BA Honors in Cultural Studies from Trent University, followed by an MPhil in Humanities here at Memorial. And then you did a PhD at Western?
I did an MA in Theory and Criticism at Western.
And then a PhD in the University of Amsterdam.
Yes.
She is an associate professor of gender studies and has previously held the position of director, interdisciplinary PhD program, and the director of the MPhil in Humanities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. That's me.
She has received the Dean of Arts Teaching Award, the SGS Dean Award for Service, and her research runs the gamut.
How did you know all that?
From philosophical aesthetics, art history, art theory, communications theory, media studies, semiotics, queer theory, and transgendered studies.
Yes.
So
Very interdisciplinary.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Jennifer and I are old friends.
Yeah.
Like, I can remember the first time I met you, those many years ago. And, we've seen our kids grow up together.
Yep, that's true.
So I'm going to start by asking you about, you came to Newfoundland in 1993 from Southwestern Ontario.
Yep.
And you did your MPhil.
I did my MPhil here.
At Memorial.
Yep.
And then you did all those other degrees.
Yes.
And then came back here.
Yeah.
So what was that trip like? What was that trajectory, that journey?
Well, it was bumpy because there were lots of I think it was bumpy and it was circuitous, and I think a big part of that was because most of my degrees, all of my degrees, are interdisciplinary. And so 25 years ago, interdisciplinary was cultural studies and a few things in the sciences, and there weren't a lot of positions for that. So applying to jobs has been a bit tricky, trying to pin down a discipline within all that. And really, for me, over the past 10 years, interdisciplinary scholarship has really opened up, and there's a lot more value to it, a lot more you can do with it, a lot more recognition, and for me that means a lot more opportunities.
I think, though, in your trajectory, you really were in a lot of different places in the university, but followed your heart and your interests, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, I've lectured in English and philosophy, and where else? Communication studies.
Gender studies.
And in the humanities, of course. And and in all of those, I mean, I was actually able to talk about what I want to talk about, which involved art or critical social theory. Aesthetics is always in there somehow, right? And even in gender studies, right? I can bring this in. That's good. Yeah.
So in 2016, you did a study of the support of the arts in Newfoundland.
Yes.
And you said, let me see. You said, and I quote, "A well-administered democratic state where citizens are encouraged to be engaged in their communities cannot exist without art." So
I remember writing that. I was on a plane, and I typed it into the note thing on my phone.
there you go. That's how critical theory gets written. It's on a phone and it's on a plane.
On a plane.
So how do you think art, makes us live better?
I think art, and any kind of art, so sculptures and writing and music and like everything, all this kind of art, it allows us to connect, to build communities, to represent ourselves, to recognize differences, to recognize similarities that people have. It helps us to espouse all the virtues that we hold to be the real virtues of living, right? Certainly what we hold, say, in Newfoundland, where we're all about creativity and inclusivity and diversity. Where does that come out? It doesn't come out in a spreadsheet, right? It comes out in art. It allows you to recognize this in so many different ways, which for me is just it's so important. The community building part is a huge part of that, right?
So let's talk about the work you're doing now.
Yeah.
And I know you have a SSHRC grant.
Yep.
What does SSHRC stand for?
The Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council.
So you're exploring the advocacy of parents of transgendered children?
Yeah.
Can you talk about?
Well, first of all, it's not just me, right? So I am joining a project that's already there, that was made by many other people. So there's lots of people. 3 of us are at MUN. There's people in Montreal and Lethbridge and Toronto and Victoria, just all over Canada, and we're all working together. So this is very much about community for me. So again, this is community building, right? In a big way, but yeah.
And so you've said that you guys, you people, have said that in 2013 there's kind of been a pivotal change, in particular, I guess, with parenting of transgendered children, but also just in the transgendered community. Can you talk about what ignited that change and what it means and how that makes transgendered children's lives different?
Recognition. So what ignited that change? I have no idea. I don't, but what I do know is that it happened. So this is something that came out of a different study, a different SSHRC-funded study, but the participants are also in this group. So Kim Manning in Montreal was one of the people who really put this together. And part of what she was talking about there was that in 2013, this is something that came across Canada with people who had no connection to one another. These were parents of trans kids or gender diverse kids, and they just started talking about it. They started asking questions, taking their kids seriously, first of all, when they say, like, I don't really think I'm what you say I am. So everybody started taking their kids seriously around the same time, which is really interesting. I don't know what happened there, but it's so important and it's so beautiful. So they take their kids seriously and they start advocating. They start asking questions or making demands. So at school or at the doctor's office or at the hospital or wherever, right? Where are the representations in TV shows? That sort of thing, right?
Can we talk about bodies and ideas in terms of the difference between gender and sex and labels and pronouns and all of that? Because it seems to me, strangely, I would say, that some of the most fiery arguments have come out of grammar. And I wonder if people not wanting to give up he and she, and I wonder if that is really a red herring for people who must change in the ways that they think.
It's absolutely a red herring, first of all, because language changes all the time. So if we're going to talk about the English language changes all the time, and the meanings of words change all the time, right? So there's that. The second point about they, which always comes up, that I can't go against the rules of grammar. Well, we do it all the time. We usually do it to people whose gender we don't know and may not seem important at this particular moment. So the jerk who's racing past me on the highway, did you see how fast they were going, right? So I don't need to know who that person was to know that, I want to say something about that person. So we use they. We use it a lot. Now we're using they in a slightly different way, slightly more intentional way, to basically to respect people. This is not a problem. It's also historically not a problem. So to talk about an individual was not a huge issue about 150 years ago. It was in English, in the English language. It was used in lots of different places. So
I think people are really
it's a red herring.
grappling to get their minds and hands and hearts around the most respectful ways of thinking about things and talking about things. So can you talk about bodies and gender and sex and the difference between those things and how, because I think there are people out there who are, want to understand, and you are calling for education.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I would say is if you really want to take a look at this, you can look up, you can Google the gender unicorn, and it gives you a really good outline of what's at issue there. I think the upshot would be that gender is something that this is an identity that you feel inside yourself, that you feel in your head when you close your eyes. So one of my colleagues here, Julie Temple Newhook, says, with a lot of her education on this, when you close your eyes, like who are you in your head? That's your gender, that's where that is. And when it comes to sex, this is also something that is treated in a very binary way, but it's not, first of all, I will say that, but that'll be something that is in your body, right? And I would consider gender and sex both to be fluid. These are on gradations. There's all sorts of different things going on. You can't link it to, as, say, the Trump administration would like to do in the States, by denying the actual existence of trans and gender diverse individuals, by tying this to chromosomes, to hormones, to what you have in your pants. None of that stuff is going to be determinative of anything, really. There's so many differences. It doesn't determine this. So those are both fluid, but one is in your head.
So we have to think in new ways, I think.
Yeah.
But also, I know that your group is looking at actual, and you've brought up the Trump administration, and of course, there's horrific things going on in Brazil and all those places where we're seeing, the extreme right take over. We're seeing new upsurges of transphobia, homophobia, every kind of racism. So. You are actually looking at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and you're looking at laws in different provinces, you and the people you're working with on this SHRC project. So what kind of things have you seen, and what kind of changes, positive changes, have you seen?
Well, here we're looking at advocacy in all those ways. So in legal ways, and any other aspect of life, because it's very important and all, to bring it in. So first of all, a big change would be a group of parents, a group of parent activists, right? Did bring this to the as a human rights case, right? So this is now your gender identity is now protected, right, as a human right in Canada. Individually within various provinces are in different places in terms of how to protect that, what that looks like, where they are with it, right? So it changes place by place. Here, for instance, it is protected, but it's very hard to tie that in with, say, healthcare, right? Because I'm just trying to think of an example. An example would be, say, top surgery. Top surgery is not covered in Newfoundland, right? For individuals. It's also at the I'm going to say whim, which is going to get me very much in trouble with the doctors. But it's at the whim of surgeons. That's at their discretion. So even though I would have a human right to express myself in this way, I can't actually get the health care that I need, right, in this province to make that happen. I would have to go somewhere else. So there are different ways of negotiating.
So how do they decide? Is this a psychological test or a physical test, or how do surgeons in Newfoundland?
This is such a big thing. That would be decided on whether or not it's worth investing time and effort into somebody whose gender you can't trust. That strikes me as a human rights violation, and there is some work going into this, but.
So it reminds me of the discussion about abortion when, abortion became more readily available. And I know that people in Newfoundland had to see a board of psychiatrists in order to get an abortion. And they were often all men. So you talk here about, you say that this advocacy work for transgendered people, children, is very gendered work. The advocacy work is gendered. And you're saying that mothers are often doing this work. And how is it gendered, or why?
Because it's care work. I think that's a big part of it is care work. So what we found just empirically in terms of there are many parent groups across the country. We have 3 here in Newfoundland of parents of trans and gender diverse kids. And for the most part, not wholly, but for the most part, it is mothers who come to these groups who are doing a lot of the advocating, say with doctors who don't believe it, or schools who won't recognize it. So they're doing a lot of that work. They're doing a lot of the asking the questions, getting the information. That's certainly something that I did, for instance. It's like when somebody comes home and has this announcement, then you look it up, right? You've had to figure it out. So what we found empirically are the people who are doing this are the mothers. But I think that's very much tied to the fact that mothering and this sort of work is care work, and care work is traditionally put in the hands of women, right, of mothers. The third thing, right, so care work is one, but the third thing that happens there is that trans identities and gender diversity is something that's been pathologized for a very long time,
yes.
right? And that's pathologization. The first stop in making this a problem
So
is
what do you mean by that?
blaming it on mothers. A pathologization by saying it's an illness, right? Saying there's something wrong. So when things go wrong, right? This is an identity issue that has been considered a problem, an illness, something that has to be changed and corrected,
illness.
right? And who is responsible for the psychological illness? Mothers. That's the first stop on this one. So some sort of trauma happened there.
But as you were saying, these mothers then become experts. Like they are delving into these questions and then become experts on the subject.
I think for those 2 reasons. I mean, from what this is only early days, but for those 2 reasons, because it's a form of care work and because mothers are the ones who are blamed for this, right? But so I can't say what happened in 2013 to make that change happen, but so many parents have, and primarily mothers have suddenly stepped forward, believe their children, believe this is not an illness, right? That they are better and stronger and healthier when they are believed and accepted for who they are, which shouldn't be rocket science, right? So the mothers are doing this sort of work.
So
I don't think that answers your question, though.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I mean, and also, of course, you have talked about in your research the fact that women, mothers, are drawing on a sort of feminism that has made them recognize, for instance, the sexism in everyday moments.
Yeah.
And that having lived with that kind of thinking and advocacy for women, it possibly allows women to easily see what transphobia looks like in the everyday.
Sure, yeah.
Because there are connections
different
there.
ways of recognizing yourself being policed or disciplined into maintaining a certain identity or a certain presentation of self that it just works differently with women than with men because of sexism in society. Absolutely. So yeah.
And then one of the things you've talked about, like just a tricky moment in parenting a trans child, and I would say this is probably true of parenting anyone, is that you must recognize some of this advocacy work is about protecting the child.
Yeah, it is about protecting.
And some of it is about recognizing their own ability to identify who they are.
Yes. And that's a key point, I think, because there are obviously a lot of attacks that parents of trans kids are subject to, and that's a major one, that we are making our kids trans. And there's a very big difference between enforcing a certain identity on your child and listening to your child and trusting that they know what they're talking about. And all the research, by the way, from so many pediatric associations points to children know, right? They know their gender identity by the time they're 3, right? They know this as kids. You might change your mind later on, right? Maybe you aren't able to fully understand it. Maybe the notion of trans identity was just never around. It was never an option, so it never came up. But children know.
And I think some of the important work that you're doing is providing a vocabulary so that when children, see, they're searching for a name, a word, a way of describing who they are when it's not completely out. The person next to you may not be the same.
Right.
So I think, can you talk about that, about finding ways of naming those feelings, those recognitions that something is different, possibly different.
This is where my own interest in critical cultural theory and representation and art comes in, because ta-da! There's a connection, because this is about finding representations and having representations of yourself out there. So if all the representations of girls look one particular way, then if you don't identify with that representation, if you do but you're not supposed to identify with that representation, there's no space for you, and there's no vocabulary for you. There's also no set of images. There's no understanding of what you are, where you're supposed to fit, how you could possibly fit, what those options are. They're not there, right? So for me, my interest, I feel like my role in this project is looking at that sort of thing. So media representations, pop cultural representations, whether you're talking about songs or literature or movies, or where the real work is being done. I think graphic novels, right? It's a huge space for this, right? To find this vocabulary, to find these presentations of a form of self, right, that are out there.
And you've looked at classical art as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I've got a colleague at the University of Winnipeg, Alison Surtees, and she's a classicist, and I'm in gender studies. And part of what Alison wanted to look at was opening a different lens onto the classical world. So not only a feminist lens, but a queer and a trans lens on the classical world. And out of a conference came these papers and these questions. So we got together and decided, let's put them together as a book. So this book has been submitted to Edinburgh University Press.
Yay!
Yay! So happy. And the essays are amazing and they're really good, but they're also mind-blowing to find that with different ideological lenses, with your archaeology or your textual analysis or your image analysis, material culture, if you just look and say, okay, maybe a heteronormative lens or heteronormative way of reading things isn't necessary here, maybe it's not even shared with that world, can that make more sense of the texts or the fragments or the pieces of art or whatever that I see? And the answer is yes. It does make more sense. You find that there were cultures who had all sorts of different genders, or no notion of gender, right? Who organized their genders in very different their bodies in very different ways than we do, and that gives a history to these diverse gender identities, which I think is so important to have, to say, like, it didn't just bang pop up now. Recognition popped up now, but this has been around for a very long time. This is called being human.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and I think of the documentary Paris is Burning, which is on Netflix, everybody. And that is in the 60s or 70s, and there's already trans people all talking about surgery and everything. So we have this notion sometimes that this is what have the kids thought of, but actually, in fact, it's been going on, as you say, since
forever.
Forever. So I know that we had a sticker situation here at Memorial.
Yeah.
And you've talked about one of the things that parents have to constantly weigh when they're advocating is the the damage of backlash. Can you talk about that because you wrote a very powerful piece in the Telegram, which I hope people will look up, because I read it and it's very moving, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what those stickers were, first of all?
The stickers didn't start here, but the stickers are basically anti-trans women. And this comes from a conversation that is happening all over the place where lots of far-right, it's a far-right conversation. Anyway, so this is coming from TERFs, which are trans exclusionary radical feminists, and these are basically people who don't want trans women in their feminism and don't consider trans women to be real women, which is baloney. Can I swear on the show?
Yes. Well, you can do what you like.
Oh my God. And it makes me so angry, because feminism is not about that. It's not about excluding certain people from not being girly enough, or not being this way enough, or not being whatever kind of woman it is that you're looking for. So yeah, the stickers made me very angry. So the stickers were out there. It's a form of protest, and it is all over. I've had reactions. So I wrote that piece, and I've had reactions then.
But first, can you tell us what your response was before you give us the reactions? Because I want it on tape. You know, because you said such powerful things about how there is nothing radical about excluding.
Oh yeah,
and
no. I mean, this sort of hate, discrimination is discrimination. That's what it is, and that's all this sort of activity. So the stickers are representative of just larger hate, and hate's been around for ages. Discrimination has been around. So there's nothing radical about this form of.
Or feminist. There's nothing feminist about that.
Not at all. Yeah.
And so, what kind of a backlash did you?
A lot of hate. I received a lot of hate, and I also received a lot of support, which is kind of amazing. So there was a lot of reactions to this. I'm just so amazed, to be honest. So from all the places where you would find these stickers, so the UK, from the States, from different parts of Canada, a couple places in South America. So I received a lot of email or Facebook or various places, which only fuels my rage from that. But I also found a lot of support from people who want to come together as a community, which is just so amazing, right? Like to turn these things around and make it into community building, to reinvest, I suppose, in what I hold to be true about feminism, about inclusivity.
Was that your first brush with
Yes.
a kind of?
Absolutely.
And this was on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter.
Yeah, social media and email, and even a couple of phone calls. Yeah.
And how did you deal with it? Well, first of all, did it hurt?
It did hurt, but not for too long.
A sting.
It was more
sting.
a surprise, like, whoa. I suppose because prior to that, when somebody that I love came out as gender diverse, I had more personal things like about how this might be wrong or questionable, things I could actually reply to. So this was, because of the anonymity of this sort of thing, right? And it's very difficult to talk back. So that was confusing, and that's where the sting is, I think.
So the anonymity of being
Yeah.
attacked on social media.
Yeah.
So the sting was brief.
Yep.
And then what did you do? How did you realign?
Then I started writing, which is great, and I agreed to do this, which is also important. No, it's just sort of double down with the kind of work that I'm doing, and I brought it back to my parent groups, and I brought it back to my colleagues, and we found we're going to find ways to put out our message in different ways, right? Just get it out there again, more so, right? Which I think is community building, and that's what feminism is.
Yes, I agree, and that's what art is in a certain way.
Absolutely.
This is art. We're making art, people. So in this journey, what have you learned about gender, about your own gender, about the gender of the people around you? What have you learned about the narrow-mindedness of others or yourself, and the open-mindedness?
Yeah. That's such a big question.
Even a little.
What did I learn?
A little question. Little answer is.
Well, I suppose I learned that I have been taking an arbitrary fixity of gender seriously, but not super seriously. I've taken it for granted, right? That there's a fixity to gender, and that it is actually completely arbitrary. There's no real reason to hold to this. So that is something that I did learn, and I think it's important. So I learned something, from all these kids, right? They know what they're talking about, and all you have to do is listen. So I learned that. I learned that what else? I learned that representation matters. Right?
Yeah.
I've always held that representation matters, but I've learned that in more so that there are more areas of the world that, of experience where it does matter to be heard and to be seen and to be recognized and to be loved, right? That it's in ways that I didn't even know were possible, right? So that's so amazing.
Jennifer, thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah.
I think we all have to continue learning.
Right.
And I'm so glad you're doing this work.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. This is
Really great talk. Happy to be here. Our next State of the Arts is going to be broadcast on November 28th, and we are very excited to be featuring the musicians and teachers Nancy Daw and Timothy Steeves, who are also known as Duo Concertante. We're going to have a little Christmas thing. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you all.